Cool. Well, it looks like most of us are here. I'm going to go ahead and start, and we'll let other people trickle in. So welcome everyone to the event tonight. I just want to do some brief housekeeping first. So tonight our speaker is Cate McGehee, and she'll be giving us a presentation on UX writing. After her presentation, we're going to have some time for Q&A. So please use the Q&A button, which is at the bottom of the Zoom screen, to submit your questions. I just want to highlight to use the button instead of the chat feature, just so that our moderators can find all the questions in the same space. Again, we also have posted a networking spreadsheet in the chat, so feel free to fill that out if you're comfortable with sharing your contact information and network with other people here. I'd also like to introduce UX Wizards, the wonderful organization that put this event together. We're a UX community that promotes camaraderie and professional growth. We also put together a ton of events every month, so join us on Slack and Meetup to stay up to date with everything that we're doing. I also want to take time to thank our sponsor for tonight's event, Adobe XD. We will be holding a raffle at the end of the event, and one of you will be winning a 12-month subscription to Adobe Creative Cloud. And now I'd like to introduce our speaker for tonight's event, Cate McGehee. Cate is a content strategist and UX writer with expertise in product design, information architecture, personalization, and cross-platform end-to-end content design. Cate is currently a UX writer at Dropbox, working on core product UI and design systems. She's also the lead instructor for the Content Strategy and Storytelling Certificate program at the University of Washington, where she is also completing her master's degree in human-centered design and engineering. Before Dropbox, she worked in content strategy at Expedia and for clients including Amazon, Unity 3D, Adidas, Les Schwab, and Microsoft. She's also volunteered time to help improve the UX of nonprofit sites such as the Vera Project, Gnarl Washington, and Geeking Out Kids of Color. Please welcome Cate McGehee, everyone.
Hi all. I'll just imagine the thunderous applause that we would hear if this was in person. I'm gonna share my screen. Okay. So one small note, I'm doing this from a laptop and I have no second screen. So this is gonna be entirely off the dome. Just, I'm seeing the same slides as you, no speaker notes. So this talk, Demystified UX Writing, the agenda is going to move around a little bit, and I just kind of wanted to give you a sample platter of some of the information that I think is really important, but also mystifying for a lot of people who are interested in this industry or even already in this industry. So I'm going to start off by introducing myself a little bit more, talking about some of the terms that we often hear floating around for UX writing, and then describing product and what product means and how the product industry works. And then finally, leave you with some rules to write by, which is sort of the practical application portion of the evening. The rest of this is just sort of education. All right, so one thing about content strategists or people working in the content industry is that we love context. So I'm going to give you a little bit more context about myself. I also feel like there's so many different roads to content. I've never, met anybody until recently who had gone to content strategy school, and I've only met those people because I started teaching at it. But for a very long time, there was no formal pathway into this industry, and so here is my informal pathway. I got a degree in creative writing, poetry, and I feel like a pretty natural outcome of this, combined with graduating into the recession, was I was a barista for about 5 years. At the same time I was working as a freelance arts journalist, I primarily wrote about music and about books. But my interest in journalism led me to a role as a media assistant for a PR firm in Washington, DC. Turns out that working in media buying has nothing to do with journalism, everything to do with Excel, really. So that was not the life for me. I moved back to Seattle, but I really liked the agency and working at an agency. And I was like, well, what can I do? I'm really good at writing. And so I joined a like SMB, which is small, medium-sized business marketing firm. It was, I would say, mostly a small business marketing firm. There, I primarily just wrote a ton of content. I wrote blog posts and landing pages. These images here on the right are some of my clients. I wrote content for gyms, salons, restaurants, but also like bail bonds. I wrote about granite and marble once a week for like a year and a half. And interestingly, cannot tell the difference between a quartz and granite countertop even to this day. At this firm, I also designed the navigation. We would create new websites for these small businesses as like sort of a package offering. And this was my favorite part of the job. I loved creating the nav structure for these sites. And when I was telling the marketing director that one day, he was like, oh, you know what you're doing is called UX. And I was like, what is UX? I'd never heard of it before. I wound up enrolling in the HCDE certificate program at UW, which gave me an amazing foundation in UX. And even to this day, like information architecture remains, I would say, my passion in terms of the UX and content strategy world. We're still in the middle. I joined another firm after this SMB marketing firm, and it was still marketing, but our clients were a lot bigger. And I was also able to actually start doing some of the UX practices I had learned about in my certificate program, including user research, wireframes, personas, journey mapping, card sorting. You can see some of those artifacts down there in the bottom right, and I loved it. I was like, I never want to write another word again, basically. I have felt like I get further and further from content writing and volume writing the longer my career has gone on, but I think that's just because of like what I'm in particularly interested in. And I enjoyed this portion of this job so much that I wound up wanting to work for a full product team at like a tech company in-house, because I'd never worked in-house before. I joined Expedia as a content strategist. I also started teaching the content strategy and UX class at UW. And then recently, about, I think 8 months ago, I joined Dropbox as a UX writer. And it's funny because I've been doing UX, I would say, for about like 5 or 6 years. But that hasn't actually been in my title until now. And UX writer, content strategist is sort of like one of the key dichotomies we're about to get into. But generally speaking, I have seen a lot of content at all levels of business. You know, I've written for nonprofits, small businesses, like major consumer brands, tech companies, and also had multiple job titles. So I'm going to tell you what I know best from like the experiences that I've had across this like diverse range, but take it with a grain of salt because this world is very wide and very messy, and I encourage you to talk to and listen to as many people as you can because everyone's experiences are different. I had this in here and I have realized, whoops, I actually can't do this because I was going to try to get a feel for your experiences, the audience, but I think there's actually too many folks to really be able to do this effectively. So just know that I was wondering, but I'll find out later in the Q&A. All right, so getting into those names, the many names of this craft. This is a little bit of a misnomer in terms of the demystifying of UX writing because I can't really actually tell you the difference between content strategy, UX writing, and content design. And these terms are only 3 of the most popular terms for this. There's UX content strategist, product content strategist, product writer, just writer sometimes, etc. But these are sort of the three you see most frequently. The reason I can't tell you like the difference that you can sort of write down and put in your pocket as a fact is because everyone has a different answer. It depends a lot on where they've worked and what they've done. And it also depends on what they're good at and what they enjoy, and sort of the direction they've taken their own careers. For example, I love information architecture, and that wouldn't actually be in a lot of people's definition of UX writing or content strategy. But for me, it's an integral piece of both of those crafts. And then also, you know, there's so much overlap. I say here the Venn diagram is a circle, and it's kind of true. You can be like, well, you know, if you're going to write, you need a strategy. And, you know, there's strategy behind your writing, but also writing is kind of like designing, and you can't really design without a strategy, etc. And then finally, the craft always predates the term. All of these things that are now roles that you can search for on LinkedIn were words that people use to describe something a lot of people were already doing. And these terms come about because you need to be able to hire for them. This is how I think about the difference. Rather than thinking about it in terms of job title, I think about the difference in terms of editorial and experience, and writing for editorial, writing for experience, and this is sort of the construct I'm going to use for a moment. So there's this marvelous content strategist called Ellie Searle in Seattle who has an amazing talk on UX writing. I'd say she's one of the Seattle authorities on UX writing, and the fact that her job title is principal content strategist sort of speaks to the meaninglessness of these words. But this talk that she often gives is called Write for Doing, Not for Reading, about UX writing. And I think this is one of the best phrases I've heard to sort of describe what's different about UX writing or about UX in general. So when you're thinking about editorial versus experience, editorial is the content for reading. Experience is the content for doing. And another thing that's making it confusing is that this change is something that's becoming clearer over time and also in some ways muddied over time. But I'd like to also look at it over time. So we're going to go back to the beginning, which was not that long ago, 2002, but 18 years is a very long time in any digital industry. So Anne Rockley is often called the mother or grandmother of content strategy. She wrote this book, Managing Enterprise Content. And obviously this was specifically about enterprise content, but it had a lot of interesting considerations for like replicability and responsive design according to device. And she really pioneered this term and sort of coined it. And so this is when that sort of entered the lexicon. The person I really think about as like the grandmother or mother of content strategy is Kristina Halvorson. And I think a lot of people think this because this book that she wrote, Content Strategy for the Web, is one of the like seminal texts of content strategy. You'll see it recommended over and over if you ever look up anything about content strategy, because she really did pave the way. She runs a company called Brain Traffic, which I feel like indicates sort of what she was thinking about with content strategy, which is traffic, which is marketing, which is writing for reading and getting people to your site. But another one of her sort of contributions that speaks to this changing over time is what's called the content strategy quad. So this quad here on the left, the circular one, this is from this book, and it's from 2009. And you can see that she sort of divides content strategy into content and people. So people is like governance, workflow, maybe making editorial calendars, or maybe like management, maybe translation services. And then the content side, like that's the actual like meat, potatoes, the substance is maybe the writing of it. The structure is maybe the interlinking between articles, or perhaps information architecture, maybe just how your articles are themselves are structured. And then this was like really popular in serving the industry for a very long time. But you can see that she released an updated version in 2018. And I think the updated version is sort of like a lot more applicable, as you might imagine, to what content strategy sort of does mean today. And you can see here, this top part is sort of where we're going, where we're looking. And this is the part that is actually about the writing. That sort of people side of the workflow and governance, that still exists, and she's calling it systems design. And it's sort of, you know, the quad is also flipped. So you can think of that systems design as like this foundation, and that's sort of the like infrastructure that powers your content. And then sitting on top of it is the actual content, which she divides into editorial and experience. I think she did a great job of staying relevant with this new quad, because this is such a nice visualization of like how I think about the industry. So Kristina Halvorson also sort of provided these 3 definitions of content strategy early on, I believe, in that book. And the first 2 here are the ones that I think are the most meaningful. The first one, content strategy guides the creation, delivery, and governance of useful, usable content. This is what I consider very editorial. The creation, delivery, governance, this is about getting that content for people to read out there into the world. The second one, content strategy, means getting the right content to the right people in the right place at the right time. That's really how I think about experience writing. This was like our motto when I worked at Expedia. I heard this constantly. It was something we would always say about what we were doing, and we were, you know, operating deeply within UX and the UX team and the product team, but we were citing Kristina Halvorson. This third one here, this is more of the systems design sort of foundational aspect. In a nutshell, again, the editorial content has readers, experience content has users. So it's also nice to think about like who you're doing it for. This example, I think, is a good one. I have a number of examples throughout all of my presentations from Expedia because I work there. And this is a really good one. We had this editorial versus experience content dichotomy a lot at work, because the marketing writers didn't really talk to the UX writers. And if you were to Google something like Orlando family-friendly hotels, you might be taken to this landing page. This is about getting traffic and views. This is writing for reading. It's for somebody who wants to learn about taking a family vacation to Orlando. On the far right is our search wizard, and this is classic UX writing. This is actually one of the main things that I worked on at Expedia, was this search wizard, which is really, it's so poorly designed, looks a lot better now. But this is writing for doing. This is something that you're trying to accomplish, and you're trying to like search for flights. Oops. All right, so you can also think about it instead of who you're writing for, like what you're writing. And so I think there's kind of generally 3 types of content. Massive generalization. There's so many types of content, but these are 3 that you'll hear a lot about. First is marketing. So this is the sort of Kristina Halvorson, you're trying to drive leads or traffic. SEO and SEM, these are industries that play into marketing and play into this editorial type of content. It's typically long and informational. The customer experience content, that's about, you know, managing a customer's relationship with a product or brand or any kind of organization after a purchase or after a conversion of some sort. And this can be, you know, a help center explaining technical difficulties. It can also just be a customer experience team who's handling disgruntled calls, maybe through a chatbot, and then it would be writing. Finally, we have product. And that is tasked with managing and optimizing the experience once the user is interacting with the product itself. So these first 2 are what I would describe as editorial. It's content for reading, whereas product, this is the content for doing. And there's sort of like an interesting blurred line with customer experience writing, because this is something someone is reading most often because they have a problem, or they really need to do something. They want to do something, but they're actually reading it for the words, you know, they're closely reading it, and it needs to be, you know, written for somebody who is a reader rather than a doer. But you'll often see a lot of people transitioning from roles in CX or maybe technical writing into product writing because they often get so sick of trying to solve problems that are created by a bad product experience. And they're like, I can just prevent these problems rather than trying to fix them after the fact. So in terms of writing for product, that third category, the experiential type of writing, you're not responsible for attracting or retaining customers. And this is something that really drew me to it at first. As I said, I'd worked at marketing agencies and I was a little tired of all of our KPIs being around attracting or retaining customers. And I wanted to just sort of make the product better and make the experience better and work better. And so that's exactly what your responsibilities are when you're writing for a product. This woman, Cate McGehee, another sort of famous content strategist, you can see here, she's having a conversation with Kristina Halvorson, in which Kristina Halvorson had asked, like, what is UX writing? What is product content strategy? What does this mean? How is this different from marketing or content strategy previously? And her reply is, it's the thing, not the thing about the thing, which, sounds silly, but I think it's an accurate description. All right, so in terms of the thing, let's talk about product. I'm also, sorry, I have to, just trying to do a time check and I don't have my phone, nor do I able to see the clock here.
You have about
right.
20 minutes.
Great. Oh, plenty. All right, so we just talked a lot about writing for product and sort of like content strategy versus product and experience versus editorial. And this is something that had really mystified me. And I don't know how many of you currently work on a product team or how many of you have, done other kinds of writing or worked for marketing agencies or in other capacities, but I didn't really know what product meant for a very long time. Basically, until I worked on a product team, until I worked at Expedia, I sort of like might have faked my way through these conversations and I thought I got it, but I didn't really. And so hopefully I can share some of what I've learned about this with you in case any of you are also confused. So we're gonna go again back to the beginning. So the original sense of a product is a commodity that is created, manufactured, or refined for sale and commerce. This is kind of what you think about when you're like, okay, products like imports and exports, or like the products that you might buy in a store. How could that be something you would write for? These are maybe the sorts of things that you're imagining. These would be products, something that is created, a commodity. In the new sense, people might say product to mean a digital tool or experience that is updated continuously while still in use. A good example, a classic example of this might be an app. Oops. Okay, so here's some other examples of this that muddy the waters. Could also be Slack, a conversation interface. REI's website also would be called a product by their product team. YouTube, a free video platform. This is also a product. They have a product team. This is a intranet for some companies like data visualization. This is also a product. Netflix, a video streaming service. This is also a product. And even a POS. Something like this has a product design team and has a user experience. So as I was saying, the word product is rooted in industrial design. It comes from those sorts of yards of fabric or watches that you were looking at earlier. This is because it used to mean something that was produced for the purpose of being sold. In the traditional sense, I guess the neo-traditional sense of product design, you're looking at something post-conversion. So this is what it means when it's like the thing, not the thing about the thing. So this means software and hardware. Really classic examples of this are Microsoft Office or an iPhone. These are things that, have product teams, have updates going out. You need people to have a good experience with them, but you're not driving conversion through them. The person already has them. So when you think about that original definition as being a commodity, these are commodities. You buy Microsoft Office, you have it on your computer until your computer melts down. However, as I said, it's getting more muddled with time, and all of those things I was saying earlier that have been called product and have product teams, they all are called that because they have a user experience. And like UX has sort of now become, I would say, synonymous with product, and that's because they have users. So all of these examples here are things that could be construed as products, even though they're all extremely different types of digital experiences. You can also hear product a lot to just like describe a group of people. You might say, you know, product is not communicating well with marketing, or like both marketing and product are taking direction from brand. Product probably doesn't have anything to do with advertising. So they're often used just as a blanket description of like the group of people who work on product. And the group of people who work on a product are here in this diagram. So UX, tech, and business. And there's this role called a product manager. And anybody who works in product is like, this is the most obvious thing, but I had no idea what this was for many years when I was working in content strategy. And I remember sitting down with like a content strategist he works at Facebook now, and he was previously working at Expedia, and I was kind of intrigued about working at Expedia. And he was trying to tell me about product managers. And I was like, what is that? And he said, it's like the CEO of the product. And you hear this phrase a lot, and that really was like a helpful thing for me to conceptualize it. And product management sort of sits at the intersection of those three roles and sort of guides the development and facilitates communication between those three arms. So here's product managers, but let's look more deeply at these three arms. So the tech side, this includes engineers. Most of the product org is comprised of engineers, because if you think about the ratio of people in the product org, you might have, 5 engineers per 1 product manager, maybe 10 engineers per 1 UX designer. And then maybe you have, 4 UX designers per 1 writer, etc. Engineers comprise most of the tech org. Also technical product managers, so sort of people who manage the technical side for the engineers, or quality assurance, this is Q&A, people who test the products. They'll often be outsourced, often in-house, but this is all the tech side. The business side, in my mind, many product managers, actually I would put them in the business side, but I believe that they do have a spot in the middle. But business often primarily includes analytics, the people who sort of measure the success, business analysts, as well as leadership, the people who sort of have a vested interest in making money from the product. It's sort of painting this Shangri-La experience of you don't have to think about money when you work in UX. And that's because somebody is thinking about the money on the product team, and it's the people on the business side. On the UX side, you don't have to. And the people on the UX team are typically this sort of triumvirate of user research, design, and then UX writing, or content strategy, depending on where you work. Pretty much anywhere that you work at any sort of tech company or product team, this is the triumvirate that you would encounter for the UX side, although these terms here might be switched. So back to that sort of triumvirate of the UX org. As I said, designers, research, content strategists, and together they all sort of go through a pretty identical process. This is another thing you see throughout any product team that you're a part of, is this product design process that doesn't vary that much. Steps may be cut out or moved around, especially if you are working on something that already exists and just needs refinement or optimization. you might move right to the testing stage. If you're creating something that's brand new, for example, we tried to put a cart in Expedia. I haven't seen that launch yet, so I'm guessing that it never will. But for that, since it was something so new, we went through a large discovery process and then ideated solutions and then, you know, mocked them up in these prototypes and tested them. All of my work at both Expedia and Dropbox, I would say, takes place in all of these stages very often. And that's one of the really nice things about this role. And I think I can say pretty confidently that that's the case for most other companies that I've heard of. For content strategists or UX writers working on product in the UX org, you get to really see the product at all stages of its life cycle and work on it, which is delightful. All right, so this is the last portion. I was like, remember I said that I would try to give you some sort of practical tips or advice in terms of UX writing or writing in general. What I really mean is like writing for experience, writing for users, because as I've been saying this whole time, these terms of content strategy and UX writing or content design are so ambiguous. So in your career, I would encourage you to just think about what you write rather than what your job title is. Is it editorial or is it experience? And then also, who are you writing for? Is it users or readers? And I know I was just saying that we need to sort of put aside these job titles a bit, but I feel like I've talked about content strategy quite a lot. So in terms of these, you know, few pieces of advice, I just want to hear quickly from the content design corner because they've been very quiet throughout this presentation. So this is Sarah Richards. She wrote this book, Content Design, and I think that this term had been kind of thrown around as an attempt to sort of reconcile the difference between UX writing and content strategy. And people are like, writing is strategic, etc. But like, is this just about marketing? And Sarah Richards didn't coin this term, but she really formalized it with the publication of this book, which is all about content designing. And personally, if I had to pick a term, I would pick content design because I do think it is the best descriptor of at least what I do on a daily basis. And this is sort of like how she describes it within the book. So content design is a way of thinking. It's about using data and evidence to give the audience what they need at the time they need it and in a way they expect. I think content design does a really good job of describing what content design is, and this is a really good description of it. The combination of like using data and research and figuring out what people need, what are the users' needs, and then fulfilling it. That is really the definition of, I would say, the craft. But in terms of like how to do it, this book is really the one that I would recommend above all. So writing is designing. This is by people who have the title of UX writers. It's also basically about content design. You can see that in the title. And their advice in this book, it's written by two people who collaborated, so Michael Metz and Andy Weffel. And they say to start by designing, the difference being, you know, writing, that editorial side is about fitting the words together. And so if you abandon that entirely and you're not even thinking about it as writing and you think about it instead as designing, then you focus on the problems. And the UX writing portion of it, or content design portion, is using language or writing or those words as a tool to solve those problems. And if you remember in the product design process that I was showing, like there's always a step in it where people are like, what is the problem that we're solving? Or there should be. good product teams start with a real user need or a problem and then solve for it. And that's also what you can do with language. So here, like, there are sort of 3 questions that you can ask yourself that I think are great. And I'm just gonna actually unfold all 3. So your writing should be usable, useful, and responsible. And they have in this book like many, granular tips on how to accomplish each of these things. But in terms of being usable, it's like you want this to be meaningful. It needs to solve that problem. Does it help people accomplish what they set out to do? And the difference between being usable and useful, it's like this is useful, it's desirable, bringing value to the user's life. And then finally, the section about being responsible, I think is especially meaningful now, and you're seeing a lot more conversations in content strategy. And this book, Writing is Designing, was the first book that I read about content strategy or content design to have a really good section about writing inclusively. So it acknowledges the possibility of like being misunderstood or misunderstanding yourself, excluding people in your language, or alienating your audience potentially. I think all 3 of these are valuable, but these are my sort of rules of thumb. And it's very easy to remember because it's 3 C's. None of these start with the letter C. Usable, useful, and responsible is also very pithy. But I found, like, for example, if I'm in a job interview or some kind of situation where somebody's like, so what is like UX writing? How do you do it well? Clear, concise, and conversational are always the 3 things that come to my mind. You need it to be clear. You need to be as clear as possible, which is often a companion to being concise. This is one of the main things that differentiates UX writing or experience writing from editorial writing, is the emphasis on concision. And then finally, like, it should be conversational. You should write the way that people talk. And, if you follow these 3 rules, you'll be able to see that all other UX writing tips sort of ladder up into them, I would say, with the possible exception of be consistent, which is the sort of ghost 4th tip here. But I would just say, as long as you are clear, concise, and conversational, you can tell that to anybody. And if you can honestly answer the question, is your writing clear, concise, and conversational? Is it as much so as possible? You will have been doing great UX writing. Anyway, that's all. And I look forward to answering more specific questions.
Thank you, Kate. That was such a good talk. Personally, I learned a lot about UX writing too. Yeah, let's give it up. A lot of applause in the chat as well, a lot of clapping emojis. Awesome. Well, yeah, I'm sure the audience has a ton of questions for you. The Q&A has been going crazy, as well as the chat. Our moderators have been watching that. So again, if you have more questions for Kate right now, please use the Q&A function instead of the chat so that it's easy to track all the questions. And I'm gonna go ahead and start asking some. Okay, someone from our Slack asked, what are your methods / experiences with collaborating with other branches of UX?
One word that gets thrown around is partner. Like, you think of them as partners, and you think of like it as a partnership and a collaboration. It's interesting because I've had negative experiences. Everyone has had negative experiences of, especially as a writer or a content strategist, because often sort of the swim lanes can be blurry between like what's the design, what's the designer's job, because ultimately they're the people that own the design, and they have, you know, the Figma file or the sketch file or whatever, and you can recommend things until the cows come home, but at the end of the day, it's like up to them to actually put them into the design. So if you ever have conflict with a designer, the thing that I always have like told myself is that there is no single decision that is as important as your relationship in the long run. And I know I'm dwelling on sort of the negative here, but the reason that I believe that is because, as I said, it's like a partnership, and you are with these people who comprise your team for your duration at that company, typically.
Great, thank you for that answer. Taking a look at this Q&A. Someone asked, what's the best way to get UX writing experience?
I think, I mean, so typically, if you're trying to become a UX writer, you need a portfolio. I don't think anybody anymore will hire you without a portfolio. However, that portfolio doesn't have to have like actual client like work that you were paid for. There's a really good thing. It's called like 100 UX writing challenges or something, but it's like a series of flashcards, and I've seen like somebody put those in their portfolio, and it was great, and it really like demonstrated versatility and skill. So I think doing that sort of like spec work that you're imagining, or volunteering for like nonprofits or student projects or anything to like get perhaps volunteer experience as well, will help you. And then typically too, like in hiring processes, you know, you have to have a portfolio to get in the door, but at least a lot of places I know of in my experience, they give you an exercise. And so your interview is usually walking through this exercise that you've completed, which is great because it gives people who maybe haven't actually like worked at some Fortune 500 company in this role, like a chance to demonstrate that they still can do it.
Great. John asked, how do you start a voice and tone guide for a product that you're working on?
I have a whole class about this. Class of like, how can I condense this? I guess one of the key things that I would say from the class that I teach is like the class that immediately precedes the voice and tone guide is mission, vision, values. And if you have not established those things, you will probably not be able to create a voice and tone guide that is going to resonate with your brand and also last and also be desirable and agreeable to all the stakeholders involved. So I guess to get started, either iron those things out if you haven't, and if you do have them, use them in the construction of your voice and tone guide.
Awesome, thank you. John asked, what's the best way to come up with a humanistic approach and tone when writing copy?
I mean, the best way to come up with it, I guess, is just to read it out loud, for starters. It should sound like something that you would say. Really simple way is to use contractions. There's often also things that like are classic grammar rules that aren't actually good UX writing. Like you can end the sentence on to, which is a preposition, but people do that in conversation all the time, and it's often like the clearest and most succinct way to say something. Another thing that I really like to do is like, if an engineer or a designer is like, hey, we need some words for this, have them give you some filler copy that isn't lorem ipsum, but like put in what they think is like an example of something that could go there, because often the people who are the non-writers, like especially engineers, they will say it in a very like everyman type of way or some kind of extremely technical way. But yeah, asking other people or, you know, your friend or partner is a good move.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of writers say that that they solicit starter copy from like non-writers all the time, and then they just go in and spark that up a little bit, and it's a good way to get really human copy going. So I've heard that as well.
That's great advice. Laura asks, I want to know what your day-to-day is like, and how much does it overlap with other UX roles in a large company?
I think everyone in UX is inundated with meetings. Like that's a pretty classic like thing for everyone in the department, because it's very collaborative, and you know, a product team has like all of these different arms of people who need to work in synchronicity together, and so that just does mean a lot of meetings. But in terms of things that aren't like, there's a lot of standing meetings. Like you'll have like, here's my UX team meeting, here's our workshop meeting, here's my like one-on-one with my manager, here's my one-on-one with like my design manager, etc. But you might also have like all hands, etc. And then you might also have like workshops, which are a type of meeting, but a little bit different because you're probably working on a problem together. You might be, you know, like workshops at work are often what they look like in like stock photography. Like you really do like sketch together and you put sticky notes up on the wall and you like will draw what you think it could be, and then like everyone passes to the left or something. Like that stuff all really happens and it's very fun, but it's definitely not something that I would say even happens every week. And then also you want like the heads down time for just writing, and that will be just me on my own, like ideating.
Yeah, absolutely. That's also my experience as well. Lots of post-its on the wall. Very
Jasper, you
typical
mind if
UX
I
work.
jump? You mind if I
Yeah, go
jump in with
ahead.
one?
Absolutely.
What do your deliverables end up looking like? I know with all different types of writing, people share their writing in different ways. Some people do copy decks. Some people will sketch it up and have it that way. What do your deliverables, or even just your communication from writer to designer, what do those tend to look like? And what tools do you use to create those?
Well, so one thing about the like difference between working in an agency and working in-house, right, is like at agencies you have like deliverables. It's like something that you're delivering, that somebody paid for. But when you're in-house, you don't have to make these like polished final things, because the final thing is like a digital experience that like a dozen different people touched in order to like make it, and then it lives on the website or the app or something. So they're a lot rougher. And it's typically just like whatever works for you. At Dropbox, everybody uses copy docs, which I had never done before, because I had always just done it in the design doc. And I think that's just like sort of a matter of preference. Some writers are like not even comfortable using Figma, and they're like, I don't even want to put it directly into the design doc. I want to just make a table in like a paper doc and like write down what it is. And that makes sense. And then some writers are like, this is a waste of time. Like it's more efficient if I just go into the design file. And designers have different feelings about it as well. So it varies.
Okay, thanks for that.
We have a question from Sarah in the audience. She asks, what advice do you have for a student looking to get an internship in UX writing?
Yeah, I mean, so you have to be a student, right? That's one of the things I think is worst about internships, or like least fair. Because I'm like, there's so many people who want to get into a different career, and it's like strange to me that they're sort of reserved for students who are sort of already like on a career path. Probably they're probably getting an internship. It's something that they just got a degree in. But rant aside, my advice would be have just a good application. I don't know. We had an intern for Dropbox UX writing, and she, you know, nobody like knew her. It wasn't like she had like secured this through networking, and I don't think that actually happens often for internships. It happens all the time for jobs, but for interns, it's like, who actually just seems like they would do the best job at this, and like who is nicest and like most like pleasant when we were like doing the interviews. And you don't even, you know, people like I think want to see sparks of like the traits that they value, but like that varies. Like you might want somebody who seems, you know, really curious, or somebody who seems really ambitious, but that's impossible to predict. So I would just say be yourself and do the best job that you can and apply to as many as you can.
Yeah, that's great advice. And when you were sharing about your perspective on it too, the chat was also that resonated with a lot of people in the audience as well. So yeah, thank you for your honest answer about that. I see Bai has asked, when does UX writing usually come or into the project, or I guess which step of the process is that?
So it varies a lot. And I like, my ideal way to work is like coming in at the very beginning at the same time as like the designer, and the, you know, user researcher also comes in at that time. And typically the thing that you're doing would be brought to you by a product manager, the CEO of the product, and they'd be like, this is the thing that we need to solve. And then the three of you would sort of like figure out how you're going to figure it out together, basically. So that's the ideal way. However, realistically, like UX writers work with multiple designers, and if you're supporting too many designers, you can't be there throughout the entire process. Like at Expedia, I was a lot more immersed. I would frequently have like one big design sort of thing going on at a time. And at Dropbox, I have like way more projects just simultaneously, and so I can't be as involved with all of them, which is kind of a bummer. But it's kind of like you just have to trust your partners more, and I trust all my partners, so it's great.
Awesome. Yeah. I guess even along those lines, there's another question that's like that. By the way, we have time for one or two more questions, so feel free to continue to put it in the Q&A box. Nicholas asks, like research or accessibility, how can I convey the value of UX writing to business units within design and outside, so it does not get glossed over or only considered just before a product goes to market? So again, kind of like involving UX early on in the process and also conveying that value to stakeholders.
I mean, so this is sort of apropos, but here's an interview tip that I figured out in my last round of interviewing. Is like, if somebody asks you what you need to improve as a UX writer or content strategist, or like, yeah, where you think your growth areas are, say this, because it's everyone's growth area. Nobody knows how to tie content to like dollar signs and KPIs. It's like one of the greatest mysteries. And like, I see like the head of UX writing at Dropbox, like trying to answer this same question. And in terms of like, you know, somebody had asked about interviews earlier, or like how you can get a job as a UX writer. Like, people don't even want to hear about it usually. Like in interviews, they care about your process, because showing your process is like the thing that's like replicable. And the numbers might not be replicable. You can be like, this increased conversions by 30%. You don't know if it's going to do that for your other company, but the process that the person goes through is replicable. But yeah, I don't have a good answer for like conveying the value of content to business units.
I've
No
had
problem.
someone before
Go ahead.
say, just real quick to jump in, she removed all of the copy from the Figma file, and she made a copy first, of course, but she removed all of the copy and text out of it and then represented it with no words. And it was literally just a bunch of boxes. And so that was kind of her way to show, like, the bulk of this deliverable, the bulk of this project is the copy. It's pictures without the actual content. So I've seen someone do that before. But as far as like putting it into measurables, you're right. It's really hard because what worked for one company may not work for the next company. So saying you increase sales by 30% is tough.
There's a content strategist called Jonathan Coleman who did something similar to what you're describing. And I don't know where it is, but it was like finding out what percentage of like a huge number of different products is like the words, which is like a pretty compelling point. I guess another like easy way is like just A/B test a string. And if you're like, I wrote these words and it just made like $2 million, which is like the kind of thing that could happen at Expedia, you know? In a way, that's like you're showing the value of content, but that's really not what you're actually there to do.
Great.
Thank you so much for that.
Yeah, thank you. I think we have time for one last question. See here that Alex asked, how many dev/product teams can a UX writer reasonably support? I've seen a recommendation that UX designers could support 2 to 3, and wasn't sure if the same recommendation applied to writers.
I don't know. I mean, it depends. I feel like that's like the way it's for everything, of course, but it depends on the size of the projects and like the size of sort of the thing that they're trying to accomplish. But I guess, you know, like ideal world, maximum of 4. If you had to have like a number, it'd be like, if you're working with more than 4 designers, like you won't be able to like really be involved with the process for any of them, most likely. And even like 4 is, I would say, pushing it a little bit, but you're probably not going to get ratios like that maybe you would ideally have. So 4 is a nice healthy number.
That still can be a lot depending on what they need too. So
definitely. I'm like trying to even remember how many I have at Dropbox right now.
Wow.
I think it's like, well, it's not like that many. It's like 5 or 6, I would say. But you know, they also like go in cycles. So it's like there's going to be an intense time for like writing or like when you're like doing like figuring out the design, but then there's like sort of fallow period where writing isn't involved and like the designer just has to like, you know, make a detailed spec with all of the like margins that are right and then like solve the weird technical questions with the engineers, and like you don't really need to be present for that.
Right, for that. And then you can kind of cycle around and support a different team during that time. Is it pretty much all like sprints based? Like each team is sprinting, but at a different interval?
Interestingly, both Dropbox and Expedia technically had sprints, and I never saw anybody actually care about them or like adhere to them. I think sprints are more for engineers and more for resource engaged teams, but also I'm not sure.
Okay.
Great. Thank you for answering all those questions. I know there are a lot. Our audience was definitely very curious to hear your perspective and advice on all these different areas related to UX writing. So thank you so much. That is all the time we have for Q&A. So thank you again, Kate, for sharing your expertise and insights with us tonight. We appreciate you being here and also everyone else who has joined us. So again, show some love in the chat as well.
Yeah,
I'm going to go ahead.
Lots of digital clapping going on in the chat right now.
Yes.
Thank you for having me. It was fun.
Yeah. And if anyone has questions or would like to reach out to Kate about tonight's presentation, we have included her LinkedIn in the networking spreadsheet, which you can find in the chat. We'll have someone put it in there again because it's blowing up right now, but you'll see that very shortly.
Perfect. All right.
And I just want to wrap up. Before we announce the winner of the giveaway, we want to invite you all to join us on our Meetup and Slack platforms once again. We're also looking for more UXers to work with and host future talks with, so please reach out if you're interested. And one last thing, we'd like to hear your thoughts on how this event went, so please take a minute to give us some feedback. And you'll see the form for that in the chat coming up shortly. And now it's time for our raffle and giveaway. Thank you again to Adobe XD for sponsoring this. And the winner of a 12-month subscription to Adobe Creative Cloud is Kathy Wang. Kathy, we're gonna have someone from our team reach out to you. So look out for that DM and we're gonna figure out logistics from there. So congratulations. And I wanna give a quick shout out to the amazing team that's helped put together this event, King, Tony, Gabby, and Seiko. And thank you all for coming. We'll see you at the next UX Wizards event.